Kia ora, welcome Davina McNickel, thanks for coming onto the program. Why are you at ECAN telling people their land is contaminated when you haven't actually tested it to make sure?
Firstly, we're not telling people their land is contaminated. What we're telling people is that their land has accommodated a former land use that is associated with hazardous substances. So it has the potential to be contaminated from that former land use. That's what we're telling people.
It has the potential,
Yeah.
But some of that land is no doubt contaminated.
Some of it could be.
Well, why don't you test it?
We don't have the mandate to test. So Environment Canterbury has a function under the Resource Management Act, as do all regional councils in the country, to identify contaminated land. So we do that by identifying land uses that have the potential to cause contamination. We aren't able to do the testing ourselves simply because the cost of doing that would be quite substantial for the regional council.
Well, you heard at a public meeting last night that neither of the people that occupy the land are able to afford to do it. So who is going to test?
Most of the time testing's not required. So in fact, if you are identified as having one of these land uses, there is no need to do any testing. We've been working quite closely with the health department to make sure that there's information for people to keep themselves from being exposed to soil that might have contaminants. So there are simple things like washing your hands, washing your vegetables. If people need to do the testing, and that would usually only be as a result of triggering some sort of legislation under a national standard, for instance, if they're repairing their land, substantial land repair, most of the testing costs and consenting costs would be covered by insurance. So EQC, private insurers are actually responsible for those costs.
Right.
So in most cases, testing's not required.
Right. There was a considerable feeling of undercurrent of dissatisfaction in that meeting last night. You obviously picked up on that.
Yep.
Yeah. The key concern being actually that people felt unfairly lumped into a system that wasn't working for them in their favour. I mean, is that legitimate for them?
It's a legitimate concern that people have, and it's a very natural response to that information. So what we're doing is having these community meetings, a series of those, so that people can raise their concerns, ask us questions, get information. We're also providing some do-it-yourself soil testing kits just for peace of mind.
And how much are they costing?
They would cost $350 for 2 samples. So we've negotiated a discounted rate with New Zealand's largest laboratory. That's just the cost of testing, so we can't really do much to reduce that any further. So if people are concerned that their vegetable garden, for instance, might have contaminants, they can go and grab a couple of samples and test it themselves. You don't need to use a specialist unless you are operating under a resource consent. So people don't have to spend an awful lot of money just to find out, but if they choose to, they can actually have some testing done.
Are you trying to scare people off their land?
Not at all, no. What we're trying to do is actually help people manage their land in a way that keeps them, their families and their pets from being exposed to potential contaminants. So it's about identifying the risk, and in most cases the risk is extremely low. But we do need people to know. They have a right to know what their land was used for. People who are purchasing land have a right to know. And then the way that land is used can be more appropriately managed. We're certainly not trying to scare people, we're trying to give them information.
I'll come back to the central question though, is how can people be absolutely sure that their soil is safe?
The only way to be absolutely sure is to have the site tested.
Right.
So in order to have that tested properly,
back onto the customer.
Unless of course they're operating under a resource consent. So if their land is being repaired and there will be significant land disturbance, then EQC will be responsible for that cost. If they're not having work done under insurance, the cost does fall back to the landowner.
People feel shortchanged by this, don't they?
Yes, they probably do, and I can understand why. Unfortunately, that's the legal framework that we work under in New Zealand.
Davina, is your property listed on the land use register?
No, my property's not on the register. However, I'm in the process of selling my house, and I will be buying another house. So I would certainly want to know what I was purchasing. We've identified 11,000 residential properties in Christchurch that are on the register, which is a very small proportion of the total land in Christchurch, really. And we've been going through the process of notifying all of those landowners so that we can invite them to those meetings and give them the information they need.
Thank you very much indeed.